When users are online, they want an experience that just works. Digital experience monitoring is a vital tool in crafting that outstanding user experience. Application performance monitoring, or APM, has long been an important element in digital experience monitoring, but it is now becoming clear that more is needed. Internet performance monitoring, or IPM, takes a close look at what's happening across the network between the users and the applications. Working together, IPM and APM provide the complete picture that's needed to assure a great digital experience. Hi, I'm Stan Gibson for CIO Marketing Services, and I'll be your host and moderator for this video webcast sponsored by Catchpoint. Joining me to explore how IPM works and what it can do for your organization is Gerardo Dada, CMO and Field CTO at Catchpoint. Welcome, Gerardo. Great to have you here for this webcast.
Thank you, Stan. It's my pleasure being here. Thanks for your time.
Before Gerardo and I dive into our discussion, just a quick word to you and our audience. Now, you're invited to take a look in the resources area of your webcast player at any time, where you'll find useful information relating to today's topic. Gerardo, to begin, application performance monitoring, or APM, is an important piece of the digital experience puzzle. Just what does APM encompass?
That's a great question. So I think most of our audience will be familiar with APM. APM has been around for 30 years, started with Wiley, one of the first APM products out there. Now there are companies like Dynatrace, Datadog, New Relic, and many others, Honeycomb, Nuance, open source. It's a very well-defined space that is focused mainly, as its name says, on application performance monitoring, meaning it looks at code traces, application infrastructure, and logs and events. Right? So it's really looking at the engine of the software, and it's a technology that's been advancing over 30 years and it's gotten pretty good. So now most APM tools are gotten to a stage where they can do a really good job of helping developers optimize the code and helping operations teams making sure that the code works properly. And of course, most of these platforms have added more technologies like synthetic monitoring, which is useful for debugging, and other technologies to monitor things like Kubernetes and cloud and networks, etc. But the core of APM is monitoring that engine, the APM, the application itself.
Well, we are in the cloud era now, and you did mention cloud. So what are the biggest challenges in monitoring today's cloud-native applications, and how do these challenges differ from what you faced with traditional applications?
Yeah, so, the cloud, it feels like we use it every single day for everything. Everything we do depends on the internet, right? So if you think about, for example, a business that seems to be offline, like a restaurant, you use maybe Yelp to find the right restaurant, then use Google Maps to get there, then you get to the restaurant, then you use maybe a QR code to look at the menu, which is done on your phone. The server might use a tablet to set up your order, send it to the kitchen electronically. You get the bill printed on a PDA, and then you have to pay usually with a credit card or with some other electronic form of payment. So basically today, if the internet was not working, if the cloud doesn't work for those applications, then restaurants are not working anymore. But we are in an age where we are all remote. We're having this conversation over the internet. Most of our work is done through the internet. Every application that we use is now not a standalone application like in the old days. I remember at the time, maybe 20 years ago, 25 years ago, you would go to work, everybody will be in the same office, and there will be a room where you would have a file server, an exchange server for email, your print server. Everything was local, right? So IT was focused on those servers in the server room and the local area network because everything was local. Now it's completely the opposite. Every application we use is hosted on the cloud. It's using APIs and components that are hosted in different clouds. They have disaster recovery technologies that put different pieces of that application in different availability zones. And every application now is a collection of services that are used combined. Like if you look at the traditional e-commerce application today, right, like now the headless commerce, etc., a typical e-commerce application will have dozens or hundreds of applications. If you look at a bank, they have payment processing and security technologies and transactions via Zelle for payment, sending payments on some other places, etc. So a bank today or an IT person at a bank needs to manage hundreds of different disconnected, geographically distributed, hybrid, and complex technologies that are cloud-based. And each one of those things requires the internet to work. So if you have an API, that API needs to be connected to DNS, to a hosting location. There's things in the internet that we typically don't think about, like BGP, the Border Gateway Protocol, that is essential for things to work. And if an IT department is not paying attention to all those things, then those dependencies, which sometimes are out of your control, but you're still responsible for, those dependencies become really your Achilles heel. Because again, your applications are managed with APM. They're going to be okay. You're in control of those. But your application now depends on your IT, and your business depends on all these different cloud technologies that are distributed all over the internet. That's why companies need to think about internet performance monitoring.
Let's talk about metrics now. What are the key metrics that IT operations teams should be looking at, and how are they different from the key metrics that have been important in the past?
That's an interesting question, because traditionally when an IT monitoring team will be looking at the infrastructure itself, right? And they will look at infrastructure metrics. So what could happen today is that IT would say, like, look, our servers look fine, our application looks fine in our dashboards, and yet our customers are complaining, right? You would call IT and say, hey, my application doesn't work, and IT will say, like, everything looks green on my side. And if it's users, you will have customers or even an API that is not working, and IT is only looking at the engine. It's almost like, we're not getting to the destination we want to get to, but your dashboard in your car looking at the engine, the gasoline to air ratio looks fine, the RPMs look fine, your oil level and temperature looks fine. Yeah, that's not really what matters. You don't get in a car to make sure your oil is good. You get in a car to get to your destination in time. So applying the same philosophy, what really matters is the experience of end users, right? So what really matters for a bank is not that the server is running at 80% capacity, or that CPU utilization is X, or that latency between the LAN and the database, or the wait times on the database are X or Y. What really matters is that a user, a consumer trying to make a deposit on their mobile device can achieve that within, let's say, 5 seconds. What really matters is that when you go to a bank to deposit a check or to get money, you can actually, the person helping you can actually complete that transaction on their computer in a reasonable amount of time. And what matters is when you actually start the transfer in a business to pay your employees, for example, you want that transfer to happen effectively and not to be down, right? So measuring the experience of your users is really important, which also means you need to measure the experience from where the users are, not where your servers are located.
Well, that certainly makes sense. And you don't want to be reactive, solving things after problems occur. So proactive monitoring is really crucial here in the cloud. What strategies are you using to move beyond reactive alerts and identify potential issues before they impact users?
Yeah, that's important in today's world, because if you're using an APM tool and just looking at infrastructure metrics and only looking at your code metrics, let's say you're a large bank and you open your bank offices at 9 o'clock in the morning Eastern time, right, in the eastern side of the country. All those banks open at the same time. At 8:50, there's no transactions. There's nothing to look at in your dashboard, because there's, the application is basically waiting for people to get to work. And maybe there was a problem last night. Maybe there was a challenge either on the application side. Maybe there was a problem on the connectivity on a region, right? Like, imagine all your branches that you have in Boston that are connected to a provider X are having latency issues that are causing lots of problems. So by the time the bank opens, people show up. Even if you look at NetFlow for network monitoring, there's no traffic. So everything looks great until the time where they start putting stuff on the computer, right? The bank tellers start putting stuff on the computer, things might not work or might be very slow, which, by the way, today, slow is the new down, right? So if something is really slow, this is just as good as down, effectively speaking. So at that time, the people on the branch get upset. You have a big line. I think we all, especially if you travel, you've heard I'm sorry, my computer is slow. It tends to happen for some reason at bank tellers and rental counters, at least for me. And people, today companies are very competitive. So a bad experience might be enough for people to switch. recent research from Accenture found that, following the example of a bank, one bad experience will get 50% of newer generations to switch banks because they lost the trust in the bank to be able to do that. The same happens when you're shopping online, right? You're looking for, I don't know, I needed a hedge trimmer last week to fix my yard, and a site was slow, and I just switched to another site. There's 20, 50 different places where I can buy the same product at about the same price. So the ability for customers to switch vendors or companies it becomes very, very easy nowadays. So the frustration has really big impact on users. That's why being proactive is important, right? So the strategy is to use synthetic monitoring to monitor those from those locations all the time before the users actually show up in your store. So as an example, we work with one of the leading banks, and we simulate a teller from each one of their major locations. So not from the cloud, not from some hypothetical location or from 2 or 3 places in the United States. We go to in each city inside the bank, we test and simulate like a robot, like it's really an agent that is simulating. Let's log into the system, make a transfer, make some other operations, log out. 5 minutes later, you do it again. So when a problem happens, we detect it immediately and we alert IT, and we can tell them how bad is the problem, what users are being impacted, which locations, etc. So you can actually have an opportunity to go and fix it. And oftentimes we have the ability to actually tell you where the problem is. In this case, we could say like, look, the problem is the connectivity that you have in all your branches in the Boston area that are connected through provider X.
Gerardo, many APM tools offer proactive synthetic monitoring. How is IPM different?
That is very true. Like a lot of people we talk to initially, when they first get exposed to IPM and to Catchpoint in particular, they say like, hey, we already use synthetics, right? I used to work at Pingdom and SolarWinds, where we use synthetics and they're cheap. And synthetics is pretty much a method of collecting data, but synthetics can get really complex. So I'll answer best by saying there are 2 things that make IPM different. One is monitoring what matters, which means synthetics is basically a simulation of a transaction, right? And so in our case at Catchpoint and any other IPM company, we pay particular attention to the internet-centric technologies, protocols, and types of tests. So we can go deeper into monitoring, let's say, your CDN or your DNS, your SSL certificates than anybody else. We're the only company on the planet that can actually do real-time BGP data. You might remember, for example, 3 years ago, Meta had a big incident, and Facebook was down, Instagram was down, WhatsApp was down for everybody all over the world. What happened is BGP, which is basically like the zip code system of the internet, had an issue with the Meta ASN. So everything at Meta was down. Their email, access to the data center. So even IT could not even go into their data centers. And so now companies like Meta rely on Catchpoint to be able to monitor that BGP technology in real time to make sure that nothing happens, that there's no hijacks, for example, because cyber criminals can use BGP to steal traffic. It's happened with cryptocurrencies, right? They steal the traffic going to them, and they can steal the cryptocurrency. It's already happened. It also can be human error as well. So that's the first thing, being able to monitor what matters, being able to go deep into all the technologies in the internet, which we monitor everything from QUIC and HTTP3, which is some of the new technologies, to MQTT, which is used for IoT devices. We've done that for 15 years. We've been working with some of the leading companies in the world to monitor ECN, which is not a new one, but a more commonly used protocol to avoid traffic congestion. And we do a really good job at monitoring some of the foundational technologies of the internet. So that's the first part, monitoring what matters in the internet. The second part is monitoring from where it matters, which is what I mentioned in that most of these APM tools have a few dozen synthetic locations where they can monitor from. And most often, like 99% of them are in the cloud, meaning in the AWS, Azure, or Google data center, or sometimes, I don't know, other hyperscaler data centers. The thing is, if you're trying to understand what is the experience of your customers, Your customers are not in an AWS or a hyperscaler data center, evidently. They don't have the same connectivity. They don't have the same bandwidth. They don't have the same constraints and challenges. So it becomes, to an extent, it becomes useless in understanding what is that real experience of the users. As an example, most APM vendors don't have any nodes in China, not at all. I was talking to one of our customers in Mexico. They don't have any nodes in Mexico either. We have a couple dozen nodes in Mexico. We have over 100 nodes in China. So we can tell you what is the experience. If you're a luxury vendor, for example, China is usually the largest market for luxury vendors. If you're a luxury retailer, let's say you're a Porsche, China is a really important market for you. We can tell you what is the experience of your dealers, of your end users, of your own employees connected through China MobileSoft versus somebody connecting a mobile device versus somebody connecting a cable by different locations around in different cities around China. We can tell you what is the impact of the Great Firewall of China on your applications, what is the latency. We can tell you how that changes over time. We can tell you which ISPs are more efficient, et cetera, et cetera. Which of your CDNs are giving your users a better experience. A traditional IPM system is completely blind to all those things. They have no context, no geographical context. And today, Catchpoint has, we're right about 3,000 global agents in over 105 different countries. Plus, our customers can deploy their own agents in their locations, right? So the bank I was talking about has deployed their own agents inside their branches. We have manufacturing companies that deploy them in their manufacturing facilities, etc. So monitoring what matters and monitoring from where it matters is really important when you care about user experience and being proactive, and that's how IPM is different.
Gerardo, today's distributed systems are certainly quite complex. How are you currently addressing the need for end-to-end visibility across all the dependencies in your application stack, including, let's say, third-party services and APIs?
Yeah, it's an interesting term you mentioned there, end-to-end visibility, because I think a lot of people in technology, especially marketers, we like using the term end-to-end and full stack and saying we do everything, right? But it's all based on what's your context. A lot of times when people say end-to-end, well, they mean, within the application stack. So in this, when we say end-to-end, we measure everything from the end user. In my case, I have a Catchpoint agent on my laptop. It's measuring the basic health of my laptop, the connectivity through Wi-Fi to my router to the internet through the backbone of the internet, through my ISP, all the way to the applications I want to use. And in the case of custom applications, we actually have tracing capability to the synthetic tracing into the code and into the even the database, right, using open telemetry. At the same time, our service might be using security services from a third party, or this application might be hosted on the cloud. We're monitoring all those third-party dependencies. And what's really cool is that now we are showing all those things in what we call the internet stack map. So for many years, IT has been used to looking at dependency maps. And those dependency maps are typically locally based, right? They're only about your application. It shows you in the most simplest way, like your web server, your application server cluster, your databases. Sometimes it shows your network devices. Sometimes it shows services within your application. But now with Stack Map, we can show everything from your dependencies to DNS, to your cloud providers, to your third-party services that you might use, etc. And it relies on also a service that we have called Sonar, which is continuously monitoring all hundreds of services around the internet. And we use AI to make sure that we detect when it's really just a failure of a test versus when it's really a service is down. So, for example, a couple of months back, I started getting messages from my own team saying our website is down, right? And effectively, Catchpoint.com was down. And what you typically do is you start looking at your application. You call, if you're a big retailer, you call a war room. Pages start going off. And in my case, I opened this application and saw like, oh, look, Amazon East is down. The hosting provider we use for our website is in Amazon East. So there's no need to open tickets or to do anything, just to wait for Amazon to fix it, right? So at least I knew what the problem was immediately, and I knew I didn't have to take any action. If you were a bigger company, we'll probably have multiple availability zones and something like that, right? The hosting company, we use Webflow, which is one of the largest ones. Could have done a little bit better to manage that dependency, but at least I knew what the problem was. Similar example, we about the year, I think it was a year and a half ago, where a lot of the retailers out there use a technology called Adobe Tag Manager, right? And it's not something they control or they monitor. So at one moment, the Adobe Tag Manager went down, stopped working, and became an incident for all those retailers and other websites that were relying on the Adobe Tag Manager, making those sites slow or unusual. Some of our customers, we have a lot of customers in retail, some of the largest e-commerce platforms and the largest retailers use Catchpoint. They get an alert saying, look, Adobe Tag Managers went down, turn it off. It's a dependency. You cannot fix it. Just turn it off on your website. It's better to run your site without the tag manager than not having a website. They turn it off, business as usual. Customers didn't notice, management didn't notice, their bank account didn't notice. Other sites, they started having problems and they didn't have this technology to continuously monitor these third-party dependencies. So they started creating a major incident. They called a war room. They have, hey, let's check the database, let's check the network, let's check our providers. And it's almost like an area where you go one by one, triage, trying to find what is the root cause of the problem. Let's go check Adobe Tag Manager. So that if you go to the status page was not updated for like 40 minutes. Down Detector took him about an hour, right? Because Down Detector relies on users to report the problems. So these companies were having significant issues because they could not pinpoint the problem. And many of our customers that were monitoring the tag manager using our Sonar service were using AI to tell them, look, your site has an issue, here's the incident, fix it, problem solved within a minute, right? That is the difference of being able to be proactive and be able to have that visual end-to-end visibility for everything that really impacts your application. And it covers everything from hosting providers to DNS to APIs to anything that you want to monitor, because our monitoring can monitor basically anything through scripts.
Gerardo, many organizations are adopting observability practices. How do you define observability in the context of your cloud applications, and what key metrics and signals are you prioritizing?
Yeah, so I think in the context of observability, it's almost become a bad word because it meant to be kind of an evolution of monitoring, and people just think about it as a fancy word for monitoring. Second, the definition was very APM-centric. But if you think about observability as really being able to understand the entire system and its implications and what's causing problems, we see a very important trend in some of the largest customers. We serve, as Catchpoint, we have only a couple hundred customers, but we serve some of the larger companies in the world. And something we see more and more often is companies are consolidating into a central monitoring team that either does the monitoring or establishes governance and best practices for all the IT teams to do their monitoring. The second is consolidation. People want to save money. APM and observability can get really expensive. And they're trying to consolidate into a single tool. They're trying to make sure they're adopting new technologies and new tools like OpenTelemetry. And having a smaller number of tools makes it easier to manage and to train and to negotiate contracts. And the third one is we see more and more people using APM with IPM working together to create really observability magic. So we have one of the largest companies in Germany is using Dynatrace and Catchpoint in their system. And their team is called AIPM squared. And they went from something like 300 incidents a month, I believe, to zero. And they're achieving this by consolidating and having this now truly end-to-end visibility, which is a combination of APM plus IPM.
Gerardo, let me ask you this. Can companies expect shorter mean time to identify, or MTTI, and mean time to resolve, or MTTR? And how about achieving better XLOs, or experience level objectives?
Yeah, so absolutely. Like the example I just mentioned for this German company who runs the websites and e-commerce sites for thousands of vendors. We see this all the time. Like when most of our customers, they usually tell us Catchpoint was the first thing to let us know that there was an incident. Right now, we're working with one of the largest social media companies who found a problem with Catchpoint, and they said, like, how come none of our other systems detected this, right? So that ability to first identify that there is a problem, then there's people call MTTL, so mean time to innocence, right? It's not my problem, it's not the network, or it's not the application. Basically means identify the real issue, and then mean time to resolve. Once you find not only that there is a problem, but what is likely the source of a problem. We also use AI to do root cause identification, as we see this end-to-end capability for an application. We have a very good technology to help you identify what's likely the root cause. You can go fix it and reduce mean time to resolve. And there's a new one we call MTTV, which is mean time to validate, because we are doing this ongoing proactive checking. Once you implemented the fix, we can within minutes tell you, yes, this actually has improved the end user experience or the customer experience or the API experience. And so all those things are very commonly shorter when you use IPM. That's the standard with all of our customers. That's how we prove our value. That's our mission in life. That's what Mehdi, our CEO, would say. Reducing MTTI is the mission why we created Catchpoint. And then you mentioned XLOs, which is interesting because in the industry, there's a lot of SLA, service level agreements, which is what you expect from a vendor to give you, or you expect from another team inside the company, right? Like I want 4 nines or something like that. There's SLO, which is a service level objective. But more and more companies are starting to adopt XLOs. An XLO is an experience level objective. And what's unique about it, it goes back to the conversation at the beginning, which is I want to make sure if I'm an online retailer, that my customers in this 10, which are 10 top geographic locations, I don't know, it could be China, New York, Paris, etc., can complete a transaction within 5 seconds. I want to make sure that my bank tellers can do this within this time in 95% of instances. Or I want to make sure that my payment API can complete a payment transaction within 500 milliseconds. If you're trading, if you're a bank, you're doing trading, it might be milliseconds for completing a trade. If you're in healthcare, I want to make sure we achieve that the doctors serving our patients in life and death situations can operate, can look at their medical files and can work 99.999% of the time from each one of our hospitals, right? So those experience level objectives set the bar for what IT is really meant to do, which is building the systems that power the business that allow us to do things. But they also allow you to align IT with the business. So then the investments you're making in IT are having a direct impact to the experience of your users or your employees, your customers, your technology, which has a direct impact on your business, right? So that we think XLO, I personally think XLOs are a great tool to unifying IT in the business, to prove the value of investments, and more importantly, to ensure that a company is paying attention to what matters, which is end user experience.
How can customers get started with Catchpoint IPM? Can they add it to what they have now?
Yeah, like I said, IPM is not exclusive. It doesn't replace anything because we're looking at usually at the internet. It's very easy oftentimes to start monitoring things without having to implement change an SDK or implement things. Sometimes you need to deploy agents inside your network. We do that, like I said, inside banks, inside governments. We have them in the German government, right? So we passed the strict privacy and security regulations. So it's easy to do that. We recognize that in this industry of observability, a lot of companies do basically start using the product and we'll send you an invoice at the end of the month or at the end of the year. And we've heard stories of surprises that are 6 or 7, sometimes even 8-digit surprises. We don't want to do that. So we created a package that we call Aperture, which is basically look for about $38,000. We'll give you all of our technology to monitor one key application. And that includes synthetic tests and API tests and DNS tests and a bunch of different technologies, including this dependency map. It's not going to be complete visibility across all the regions and all the tests you want to do, but it's super easy to get started. So if you're a buyer, instead of saying, I need to make $1 million investment, and I don't know I'm going to get overages on top of that, and I hope this investment pays off, your risk is limited to $38,000, right? So instead of spending 6 months designing the right solution, we want people to get started, start seeing value from our product, and based on the value you see, you start adding more tests and more regions or more use cases, more applications. And that way you have more confidence in the solution. You're seeing value immediately from the solution, and you can grow with confidence that there are not going to be any financial surprises.
Gerardo, we're almost at the end of our time. What are the key points that members of our audience should remember?
Well, the key point is, I would say, the world has changed, and everything we do in our professional and personal lives depends on the internet. The internet is now complex, distributed, hybrid, service-oriented. So it's important for companies to look at IPM technologies. We're not the only one. We like to believe we're the best. But there are other technologies out there. So I really encourage any person in IT to seriously take a look at internet performance monitoring. And second, pay attention to your user experience. Set that as your goal, as your ultimate objective. Implement XLOs. And if you do those things, we've seen that IT gets better and gets better alignment to the business. And ultimately, what we want is what we call, we want companies to achieve internet resilience, meaning you can be resilient against any risk, any incident, any problem out there. Of course, you're not going to be 100% immune. Nobody can promise that. But at least you will be able to catch incidents faster, respond faster, find the root cause faster, and deliver better performance and better resilience to all your digital systems.
That's great information, Gerardo. Thank you. Well, that is all the time we have in this video webcast. Many thanks to Gerardo Dada, Field CTO at Catchpoint, for explaining the pivotal role of IPM in delivering a great digital experience by closely monitoring internet traffic globally. For more information on this topic, please do see the resources area of your webcast player. And thanks for joining us. For Catchpoint and CIO, I'm Stan Gibson.
Thank you, Stan. Thanks, everybody.